The city of Portsmouth sweats in the summer. It's a wet, heavy heat that steams off the cobblestones and clings to the old brick of the townhouses in the historic district. The houses stand shoulder to shoulder, a tight-lipped row of secrets, their windows like weary eyes watching the centuries drift by. In one of these houses, number 312 on Sycamore Lane, a different kind of decay had taken root. It was a sweet, cloying smell, a scent that tried to hide in the corners and under the furniture. It was the smell of something terribly wrong. For nearly 2 months, the neighbors had accepted the story. Laura Mason, the woman of the house, had gone away. Her husband, Mark, a quiet, almost forgettable man, told everyone she'd gone down to Florida to stay with her sister. The stress of the city, he'd say with a sad, small smile. She just needed a break. It made sense. Laura was a tightly wound woman, a perfectionist. A long vacation seemed plausible, but the smell. It started as a faint, sickly sweetness, like overripe fruit left in the sun. Mark bought scented candles, dozens of them. The cloying aroma of vanilla and cinnamon fought a losing battle with the insidious odor from below. Then came the air fresheners, the plug-in kind that pulsed chemical lavender into the air. Still, the smell persisted, growing stronger, heavier, taking on a greasy metallic undertone. It began to seep through the floorboards, through the thin walls that separated number 312 from its neighbors. Mrs. Gable, the old woman who had lived at 314 for 50 years, noticed it first. She'd smell it in her own living room, a phantom stench that made her wrinkle her nose and check her own trash. She also noticed the girl. Just days after Laura had supposedly left for Florida, a new woman had moved in. Her name was Chloe. Mark introduced her as his cousin, up from the south, staying for a while to help him out while Laura was away. Chloe was young, vibrant, with a loud laugh that felt alien in the quiet, oppressive air of the house. Mrs. Gable would see them through her kitchen window, sitting on the small back patio. She saw the way Mark touched her arm, the way Chloe would lean her head on his shoulder. It wasn't the way cousins behaved. It was the behavior of lovers, brazen and careless in their stolen home. The lie was as thin as the walls between their houses, but no one said anything. People in Portsmouth kept to themselves. It wasn't their business, until the smell made it their business. It became a presence, a physical entity in the house. It was the first thing you noticed when you walked past the front door, a wave of rot that hit you in the back of the throat. Mark's excuses became more frantic. A dead rat under the floorboards, he told one neighbor. A problem with the old sewage pipes, he told another. Finally, he called a contractor, a young guy named Danny, just trying to make a living. The job was simple: pull up some of the living room tiles and check the foundation. "I think a pipe burst and everything's starting to rot under there," Mark explained, his face a mask of strained nonchalance. The moment Danny stepped into the house, he knew. It wasn't a burst pipe. He'd smelled death before, from animals trapped in walls. This was that smell, magnified 1,000 times. It was a thick, gagging miasma of putrescence. He tried to breathe through his mouth, but he could taste it. He looked at the floor. The living room had old terracotta-style tiles, but a large section in the center of the room was different. The grout lines were brighter, whiter, inconsistent with the aged, stained grout of the surrounding floor. It looked new, hasty, a patch job. Danny knelt and tapped one of the new tiles with the handle of his hammer. It made a solid, dull thud. He tapped another. Solid. Mark, the husband, stood over him watching, his arms crossed. He wasn't sweating from the heat. He was sweating from fear. "I'm gonna have to break one of these to see what's underneath," Danny said, his voice muffled by the collar of his shirt he'd pulled over his nose. Mark just nodded, his eyes fixed on the floor. "Go ahead." Danny took a chisel and hammer and gave a sharp rap to the edge of a tile. It cracked. He pried up the pieces. Underneath was a thick, smooth layer of concrete. It was new, perfectly poured, too perfect, a little too smooth. Mark was a structural engineer. Danny knew that from their phone call. The man knew his concrete. Danny chipped away at the concrete. It was at least 4 inches thick. As he worked, the smell intensified, blooming up from the hole he was creating. It was unbearable. He felt his stomach heave. This wasn't a dead rat. This was something big, something human. He stopped, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked up at Mark. Mark's face was a pale, waxy sheen. His eyes were wide, not with concern, but with a terrifying, predatory focus. He was watching Danny's every move, his body coiled like a snake. Danny stood up slowly. "You know what, man? I think this is a bigger job than I thought. I gotta go back to the truck, get some more tools, and a mask, a better mask." He backed away toward the door, not turning his back on Mark. He fumbled with the doorknob, his hands shaking. He half expected Mark to lunge at him, to stop him. But Mark just stood there, a silent, terrifying statue in the center of his stinking, secret-filled house. Danny stumbled out into the fresh air, gulping it down like a drowning man. He didn't go to his truck. He ran. He ran down the block, pulled out his phone, and with trembling fingers he dialed 911. The police arrived in a quiet swarm. They taped off the house. The neighbors gathered on their stoops, their quiet curiosity finally bursting into open, horrified speculation. They took Mark and Chloe away in separate cars. They didn't fight. They went quietly, as if they knew this day was always coming. Then the forensic team went in. They wore full hazmat suits, their faces obscured by respirators. They looked like astronauts exploring a hostile alien world, and in a way, they were. They broke through the concrete with methodical, brutal efficiency. The sound of the jackhammer echoed down Sycamore Lane, a percussive death rattle. Under the concrete, they found a layer of lime powder, a desperate chemical attempt to fight the decay. Under the lime, they found a thick sheet of black plastic, the kind used in construction, a tarp. Under the tarp, they found what was left of Laura Mason. She was in pieces. Her body had been expertly dismembered, each part wrapped tightly in its own shroud of nylon and plastic bags. They were buried about 2 feet deep in the dark, damp earth beneath the foundation. The investigators unearthed her torso first, then her legs, her arms, each piece a gruesome discovery, a testament to a monstrous act. They found her head last, buried in the deepest corner of the makeshift grave. Her mouth was sealed with a thick wrap of duct tape, and then again with a layer of clear nylon. Her eyes were gone, but the silent scream was still there, etched into the decaying bones of her face. She had been buried alive in her own home, silenced forever, while her killer walked on the floor above her, sleeping in her bed, living her life. The house on Sycamore Lane was no longer a home. It was a tomb, a sepulcher sealed with fresh tile and grout, a monument to a hatred so profound it could turn a living room into a graveyard. In the cold, sterile interrogation room, Mark Mason was a different man. The quiet, henpecked husband was gone. In his place was a creature of chilling calm. There were no tears, no denials, no panicked excuses. He sat with his hands cuffed to the table and told them everything, his voice a flat, emotionless monotone. "She drove me to it," he said, looking the detective dead in the eye. "She killed me every day, slowly. This was just balancing the books." He told them about the suffocation, the control, the way Laura managed every aspect of his life. He wasn't a husband. He was an employee in a company of 2, and she was the CEO. She controlled the bank accounts. She questioned every expenditure, from a new set of tools for work to a beer with a friend after a long day. His paycheck was deposited directly into an account he couldn't access without her approval. He was a grown man, a successful engineer, and he was given an allowance. "It wasn't just the money," he said, his voice dropping slightly. "It was everything. The way I dressed, the friends I had, the way I loaded the dishwasher. There was a right way to do everything, her way, and any other way was a personal failing, a sign of my incompetence." He described a life of constant, low-grade criticism, of being chipped away piece by piece until he felt like nothing. He was a ghost in his own life, a silent, obedient machine that existed to earn money and follow her rules. "So I killed her." The statement was delivered with the same emotional weight as if he'd said, "So, I fixed the leaky faucet. I did it perfectly. No one would have ever known if it wasn't for the smell. That was my only mistake." Underestimating the science of decay, his confession was a horror story told as a technical manual. After a particularly vicious argument on the night of May 9th, an argument over a $500 bonus he had received and not immediately reported to her, he waited for her to fall asleep. He stood over the bed, watching her chest rise and fall, and the hatred that had been simmering for years finally boiled over. He took a pillow, a thick, decorative one, from the chair in the corner and pressed it down over her face. She fought. He said, a flicker of something, not remorse, but perhaps memory in his eyes, more than I thought she would, but I was stronger. Immediately after she went still, he called Chloe. She was waiting just a few blocks away at a late-night coffee shop. She came over at once. She was not a shocked, horrified bystander dragged into a nightmare. She was a co-conspirator. In a separate interrogation room, Chloe Reed told her side of the story, her words punctuated by theatrical sobs. But her tears, like Mark's calm, were a performance. I loved him. She wept, her hands trembling. I just loved him so much. I didn't want him to go to jail. I thought if we hid the body, if we hid it really well, we could just be together. No one would ever find out. Her story matched Mark's with terrifying precision. They had been planning it for months, not the murder itself perhaps, but the escape, the what if. What if Laura just disappeared? The fantasy slowly hardened into a plan. Chloe admitted she had supplied some of the tools. The heavy-duty contractor bags, the tarp, the knife, the lime, even the bag of quickset cement. She had bought them over the course of a few weeks from different hardware stores all over the city, paying in cash. She described the night with a chilling detachment that mirrored Mark's. They dragged Laura's body from the upstairs bedroom, the dead weight a clumsy, awkward burden. They took her to the basement. There, on the cold concrete floor, with the hum of the water heater as their only soundtrack, Mark, the engineer, went to work. He dismembered her with a saw he kept for construction jobs. Chloe helped. She held the plastic bags open. She wiped up the blood with bleach and old towels, her movements efficient and practiced. They worked in a focused, purposeful silence. A grotesque parody of a couple working together on a home improvement project. They wrapped each piece tightly, layering nylon and plastic, sealing them with duct tape. Then they began to dig. The basement floor was old, a thin layer of concrete over dirt. It was easy work. They dug a trench, about 6 feet long and 3 feet wide. Mark was meticulous. He explained to Chloe how they needed to place the parts to ensure even weight distribution. How the lime would slow the decomposition and neutralize the odor. How the thick plastic tarp would act as a vapor barrier. He was building a tomb, and he was applying all the principles of his trade. They worked all night. As the sun began to rise, they started mixing the cement. Mark knew the exact ratio of water to powder to create a strong, non-porous mixture. They poured it into the grave, smoothing the top with a trowel, ensuring there were no air pockets. No hollow spots that would betray the horror beneath. They worked quickly, finishing just as the city was waking up. Then they went upstairs, relaid the tiles, and grouted them. They cleaned the basement from top to bottom, every surface scrubbed with bleach until the air was sharp and sterile. They showered, washing away the blood and the dirt and the sin, and then, as the morning light streamed into the kitchen, they sat at the table where Laura had eaten her last meal, and they made breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast. They ate together in the quiet, stinking house like any other couple on any other morning. They had committed an unspeakable act, and then they had simply continued with their lives, as if nothing had happened at all. The trial was a media sensation. It was held on November 11th, a cold, gray day that matched the mood of the city. Mark Mason walked into the courtroom with a confident, almost arrogant stride. He showed no fear, no remorse. He looked at the jury, at the judge, with the same cold, dead eyes he had shown the detectives. When asked if he had anything to say, he stood up. "I don't regret it," he said, his voice clear and steady, ringing through the silent courtroom. She was killing me. Every day with her rules and her judgment and her control, I couldn't breathe. This was the only way I could be free. What I did was a single act. What she did to me was a death by 1,000 cuts for years. The courtroom erupted in gasps and angry murmurs. He had confessed to murder, and in the same breath he had blamed his victim. Chloe Reed was a different story. She trembled and wept throughout the proceedings. Her defense was simple. Blind love. She was a victim too, she claimed. A victim of her love for a man who had pushed her to do something terrible. But her tears seemed hollow. Her regret focused only on the fact that they had been caught. I just wanted to protect him. I loved him. The words were a mantra, a shield she tried to use against the horror of her own actions. The jury was not swayed by Mark's justification or Chloe's tears. The evidence was overwhelming, the crime too monstrous. They found them both guilty. Nguyen Tuan Hung was sentenced to death. Mark Mason, in the Americanized version of this tale, would face a similar fate, a sentence of death by lethal injection or life in prison without the possibility of parole in a state without the death penalty. For this story's purpose, let's say the state had it. The judge, his voice heavy with disgust, called him a monster of profound cruelty and arrogance. Mark received the sentence without flinching. Vu Te Lu Yen, or Chloe Reed, received a life sentence. Her love was not a defense. It was the motive for her complicity in a crime that shocked the conscience of the city. She collapsed into sobs as she was led away, her fantasy of a life with Mark ending in the brutal reality of a prison cell. Laura's family was not in the courtroom. They had endured the discovery of her body, the gruesome details of her murder, the character assassination by her killer. They could not bear to be in the same room as the people who had destroyed her. They issued a simple statement, asking for privacy, and for people to remember Laura not for how she died, but for the life she had lived, a life of order and care, which her killer had twisted into a justification for murder. The case of the body under the floorboards became a dark legend in Portsmouth. It sparked debates in coffee shops and online forums. Was Mark Mason a pure monster, or was he a man driven to an unspeakable act by years of psychological abuse? Was Chloe a willing accomplice, or a foolish girl manipulated by a sociopath? The truth, as always, was likely a murky combination of both. The house on Sycamore Lane was sold at auction, but no one wanted to live there. It was a place of profound and lingering horror. The new owners gutted it completely, tearing out the floors, the walls, everything, trying to erase the stain of what had happened there. But some things can't be erased. The memory lingered. The story serves as a terrifying warning, a testament to the darkness that can hide behind a quiet face and a normal life. It shows how love, when twisted by obsession and jealousy, can become a weapon. How resentment, left to fester in the dark, can grow into a monstrous hatred capable of anything. It proves that the most terrifying monsters are not the ones that hide in the shadows. They are the ones who smile at you, who share your home, who sleep in your bed, and who, with meticulous, terrifying calm, can turn your life into a tomb, and then continue on as if nothing has happened at all. They just make breakfast,